The ground shook under the roar of bulldozers as Sylvester Stallone stood alone at the edge of Boulder Creek, fists clenched, watching decades of wild beauty torn apart in minutes. Heavy machines clawed at the trees he had sworn to protect. Concrete trucks lined up like an invading army, and the air reeked of fresh-cut wood and oil. The men in neon vests didn't care that Stallone held in his hand the original deed protecting this land. They didn't care who he was or what he fought for. They only saw another old creek in the way of new profits, but Stallone had seen this kind of battle before. Not in a ring, not on a movie set, but here in the real world, where the stakes were measured in roots, rivers, and memories. This wasn't going to end in a handshake. It was going to end the way nature always ends things, with patience, with force, and with no mercy for those who thought they could bury the past in concrete. If you enjoyed this inspirational story and want more powerful journeys like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of Stallone's fight inspired you the most. Your voice matters here. Let's keep sharing stories that remind us of the strength, resilience, and heart within us all. It all started with the letters. Crisp, stiff envelopes sliding into Stallone's rusted mailbox like poisoned darts. Exciting new opportunities, they said. Community improvements, they promised. Stallone ignored them. Developers had circled Boulder County for decades, but the land here was stubborn, just like the people who called it home. He figured they would get bored and move on. He figured wrong. The very next afternoon, he drove down to the Boulder County Clerk's office, records in hand. The property lines were clear. The creek, the woods, the battered old cabin, everything was his, protected under a decades-old conservation easement. He carried copies of the documents to the Silver Rock trailer parked 2 miles down the dirt road. A kid in khakis and mirrored sunglasses accepted them with a polite smile and a promise to review and escalate accordingly. 2 weeks later, the trees began to fall. The first crash hit him like a punch to the gut. The old cottonwood splitting open with a crack like gunfire, the heavy trunk folding in on itself and crashing to the ground, snapping smaller trees in its path. It wasn't just a tree. It was the boundary between civilization and wilderness, between arrogance and respect, and they had crossed it without hesitation. That night, Stallone sat alone in the crooked kitchen of his cabin, flipping through dusty folders handed down from the property's original owners, finding old survey maps, official Boulder County seals, notarized confirmations stating that no construction could legally alter the creek's natural flow. Proof. Hard, irrefutable proof. He could fight them. He would fight them. But Silver Rock didn't move like a blunt hammer. They moved like a slow-rolling avalanche. By the time he filed his formal complaints with the county, new roads had been paved, utilities installed, model homes framed up along what once were open meadows. A fake town center had risen from the earth like a plastic flower, complete with a coffee shop and a wellness spa, marketed to the new elite. Stallone's cabin, once a tiny dot in a sea of green, now looked like an island trapped in a rising tide of concrete and manicured landscaping. But the creek was still there, stubbornly carving its slow path across the land, even as debris clogged its banks and construction runoff muddied its once clear waters. It still lived, and so did hope. He fought back in every way he knew. He photographed construction crews dumping fill dangerously close to the waterline. He filmed sagging silt fences buckling under storm runoff. He documented the subtle changes in the land, the way the soil grew heavy with water after every rain, the way the roots of the remaining trees sagged under the strain. He filed complaints, attended council meetings, stood at microphones, and named every violation line by line. Some neighbors rallied around him, a few old-timers who remembered when this place was nothing but ranches and open fields. Most stayed silent, afraid to challenge the flood of money pouring into Silver Rock's pockets. Progress was a hungry god, and few dared to stand in its way. Then came the first great storm. Meteorologists called it a 100-year event, a freak collision of cold fronts, dumping inches of rain over Boulder County in less than a day. The ground, already battered and stripped bare by construction, couldn't hold it. Water sheared down the slopes, hammering the unfinished subdivisions, flooding basements, buckling sidewalks. Stallone watched from his porch as the creek overflowed its artificial banks, carving new scars across the landscape, reclaiming what had been stolen. He saw newly built streets crack open like eggshells under the pressure of water seeking the old, true paths. He saw model homes sag and tilt, water lapping at their brand-new foundations. Silver Rock's representatives called emergency meetings, tossing around words like unforeseeable and act of God. But Stallone knew better. Nature doesn't forget. Water doesn't forgive. The land had been whispering warnings for months, and they had poured concrete over its mouth, thinking silence meant surrender. When the damage assessments began rolling in, the cracks widened, not just in the streets, but in the glossy facade Silver Rock had built. Lawsuits started piling up. Insurance adjusters prowled the streets like vultures, snapping pictures of moldy walls and shifted driveways. Furious homeowners demanded answers. And slowly, very slowly, the focus began to shift from freak weather to poor planning, from bad luck to human arrogance. Stallone stayed patient. He stayed silent. He kept his evidence close, updating his files with every new storm, every new failure. He waited because he understood what no developer ever seemed to. The land plays the long game. It doesn't roar and rage at first. It waits. It soaks. It cracks your foundations from the inside out, inch by inch, until one day your walls no longer fit your doors, and your dreams collapse under the weight of your own foolishness. The second storm came faster and harder, and this time even the optimists couldn't pretend it was an anomaly. Stallone watched Boulder Creek surge back to life, spilling over manicured lawns, tearing through decorative fences, dragging mulch and plastic lawn signs downstream like battlefield debris. At dawn, he walked the muddy roads, camera slung around his neck, documenting the evidence. The same project manager, who had once sneered at his protests, now stood knee-deep in filthy water, shouting helplessly into his cell phone. And still, Silver Rock denied everything. They issued statements blaming individual property maintenance issues and unexpected soil instability. They fined homeowners for improper drainage maintenance, even as their own office parking lot sank into mud. Stallone said nothing. He only smiled, that slow, weary smile of a man who had fought tougher battles, in darker alleys than this one, because he knew what was coming, and this time he was ready. 3 days after the second storm, Stallone received the certified letter he had been waiting for. It arrived damp and crumpled, the ink on the return address already smudged by the rain. But the seal of the Boulder County Environmental Authority was unmistakable. Inside was a formal notice. The county had opened an investigation into potential illegal modifications of protected natural waterways, citing multiple violations tied directly to Silver Rock developments. Stallone allowed himself a rare smile, folded the letter carefully, and tucked it into the thick binder already brimming with photos, maps, witness statements, and soil reports. He didn't celebrate. Not yet. The real battle was just beginning. Silver Rock responded exactly as he had expected, throwing their army of lawyers into the fray. They filed motions to dismiss the investigation, claimed the conservation easement had expired, produced glossy marketing brochures touting their green building practices and eco-friendly initiatives. But the county wasn't fooled. Not after 2 storms, 2 rounds of flooding, 24 insurance claims, and the growing mountain of evidence stacked against them. Inspectors arrived in muddy boots, armed with clipboards and GPS survey equipment, walking the broken streets, photographing the buckled sidewalks, taking core samples from the drowning lawns. Stallone trailed them at a respectful distance, silent, steady, watching as they documented the slow collapse of everything Silver Rock had built on stolen earth. Word spread quickly. The Boulder Daily Camera ran a front-page story. Wetlands destroyed, homes damaged, development at center of scandal. The local news stations parked their vans at the mouth of the new subdivision, cameras capturing the site of $2 million homes sitting in 3 feet of dirty water, their once pristine driveways turned to cracked mosaics of sunken concrete. Homeowners who had once proudly toasted their new beginnings at open house parties now huddled in soggy living rooms, arguing with insurance adjusters and trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so fast. Stallone didn't have to say a word. Nature was doing all the talking for him. Silver Rock tried to regroup, hosting emergency community listening sessions at the hastily erected sales center, handing out bottled water and soft apologies to angry residents. Stallone attended the first session, sitting in the back, arms folded, face unreadable under the brim of his old felt hat. The project manager, now visibly thinner, his hair graying at the temples, stood in front of a hastily assembled slideshow, clicking through charts and graphs meant to explain away the rising floodwaters as climate anomalies and localized maintenance failures. No one believed him. When Stallone finally rose to speak, the room fell into a heavy silence. He didn't shout. He didn't lecture. He simply pulled out the original easement documents, yellowed and frayed, stamped with the county's seal, and laid them carefully on the nearest folding table. "This land was never yours to change," he said, voice low but carrying to the corners of the room. "You didn't just pave over a creek. You paved over a promise. And now you're paying for it." No one clapped. No one needed to. The words landed heavier than any applause. The following week, lawsuits began to rain down harder than the autumn storms. Homeowners banded together, filing a class action suit against Silver Rock for fraud, negligence, and breach of contract. Environmental groups joined in, citing destruction of protected waterways and violations of federal wetlands regulations. The Boulder County District Attorney's Office announced a formal review. And through it all, Stallone remained in the background, documenting, recording, waiting. He wasn't interested in the lawsuits, the settlements, or the political theater. He had one goal: to see the creek and the land surrounding it restored. Silver Rock's empire began to crumble faster than even he had expected. Buyers canceled contracts. Lenders pulled financing. The company's stock price, once a rising star among local developers, plummeted under the weight of the scandal. One by one, the model homes stood abandoned, their windows dark, for sale signs sagging in the muddy lawns. Insurance companies refused coverage for damages caused by known and preventable alterations to natural drainage systems, leaving furious homeowners trapped in homes they couldn't sell, couldn't fix, and could barely afford to walk away from. By late November, Boulder Creek had swollen beyond recognition. No longer the lazy stream Stallone had fished in during cool spring mornings, but a broad, relentless current, carving new scars into the battered landscape. Entire sections of road buckled and washed away. Makeshift gravel paths crumbled into muddy sinkholes. The new playground Silver Rock had boasted about in its brochures sat half submerged, a surreal tableau of a plastic slide poking up from a dirty lagoon. News crews arrived with helicopters, capturing dramatic aerial footage of the destruction, broadcast across the state under headlines like "Man-Made Disaster in Boulder County." Silver Rock's senior leadership tried to disappear into silence, but subpoenas dragged them back into the spotlight. Still, Stallone said little. His neighbors knew the truth. The land knew the truth. And the truth didn't need shouting to be heard. As December rolled in, cold winds tore across the ruined subdivision, scattering debris and stripping what was left of the manicured landscaping. The county issued official condemnation notices for the worst affected homes. Red tags appeared on front doors like ugly scars. Unsafe structure. Immediate evacuation recommended. Families packed moving trucks in grim silence. Christmas lights blinked feebly from broken windows, a hollow reminder of the dreams buried under the mud. On the night the first demolition crew arrived, Stallone stood at the edge of his porch, mug of black coffee in hand, and watched the heavy machinery rumble into the wreckage. He didn't feel joy. He didn't feel vindicated. He felt the heavy, solemn satisfaction of knowing that some lessons can't be taught with warnings or lawsuits. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way, carved into the bones of a place, with the relentless patience of rain and stone and time. Silver Rock tried one last desperate gambit, petitioning the county for emergency permits to build an elaborate flood diversion system, more concrete, more asphalt, more pipes. They argued it was the only way to stabilize the subdivision and protect the remaining properties. Stallone attended the hearing, sitting quietly at the back of the crowded county hall as engineers laid out their expensive, desperate plans. When the floor opened for public comment, he rose slowly, the room tilting toward him like iron filings to a magnet. He pulled no papers this time. He carried no folders, no maps, no legal documents. He spoke simply. You can't solve a bad idea with a bigger bad idea. You broke the land. You buried its voice. Now you want to smother it again. But it won't stay buried. It never does. The commissioners voted unanimously to deny Silver Rock's request. And with that, the final pillar of their empire crumbled into dust. Spring came late to Boulder that year, a hesitant thaw after months of bitter winds and frozen ground. Where the subdivision had once stood, little remained but twisted rebar, cracked foundations, and the broken skeletons of what were supposed to be luxury homes. Insurance claims had been denied across the board, foreclosure notices nailed like grim trophies to sagging door frames. Silver Rock had quietly filed for bankruptcy protection. The last press release buried on a back page no one bothered to read. In the weeks after the final storm, the county initiated a sweeping recovery plan aimed not at rebuilding, but at restoring. Stallone stood at the head of a long line of volunteers that first morning, shovel in one hand, battered work gloves on the other, watching as trucks from the Boulder County Environmental Office arrived laden with saplings, native grasses, and load after load of clean topsoil. The restoration effort was monumental. The scars left by the bulldozers and cement mixers ran deep, but Stallone knew the land wasn't broken beyond repair. It was waiting, always waiting. They worked every weekend, digging out the last of the shattered asphalt, pulling twisted metal stakes from the once soft earth. Stallone spent long hours knee-deep in the mud, hands blistered and aching, hauling out debris and replanting the roots of the forest that had been stolen. College kids showed up with pickaxes and wide grins. Old-timers with sun-creased faces brought sandwiches and cold beer. Even some of the displaced homeowners, their lawsuits pending, found their way back to the fields and creek banks, trading resentment for resilience. Stallone didn't lead with speeches or slogans. He led by showing up, day after day, his presence a steady, undeniable reminder that the land could heal if people got out of the way long enough to let it breathe. By midsummer, the first signs of life began to return. Willow saplings reached tentative fingers toward the sky. Wild grasses carpeted the battered hillsides in shades of green so vivid they seemed almost defiant. Dragonflies spun lazy arcs over pools of clear water where trash and rubble had once clogged the flow. The frogs came back too, their nightly chorus a ragged but joyful noise against the backdrop of the slowly recovering creek. Boulder Creek itself widened and deepened with each rain, carving out its old familiar path, shrugging off the last human scars as easily as a dog shakes off water. The heavy rains no longer sent torrents crashing across the fields. Instead, the water soaked into the reborn wetlands, absorbed by roots and rich black earth, welcomed home by the landscape it had shaped over centuries. Stallone built a new trail along the creek's edge, a winding, humble path marked by stones and fallen branches rather than plastic signs and steel rails. He refused offers from the county to pave it, to improve it. It wasn't meant to be easy. It wasn't meant to be controlled. It was meant to be real. He spent afternoons whittling a simple wooden sign from a thick slab of pine, carving the letters slowly, carefully, until the message stood clear. You can't concrete over life. He mounted it at the trailhead himself, the smell of fresh sawdust mingling with the sharp scent of the new grasses and damp earth. News crews returned, not to capture disaster this time, but to marvel at resilience. The same stations that had broadcast the flooding now filmed volunteers planting trees and children splashing in the shallows. The daily camera ran a full-page photo of Stallone kneeling beside a young sapling, hands caked in dirt, grinning under a battered ball cap that simply read, "Creek Keeper." He gave no interviews, posed for no portraits. His story was written into the ground, into the stones lining the banks, into the saplings bending gently in the breeze. Karen Lafferty, the Silver Rock project manager, who had once barked orders over roaring machinery, sold her suburban home at a loss and moved 2 counties over. Rumors circulated that she had taken a job at a mid-sized engineering firm, lower on the totem pole than she had ever imagined for herself. No one missed her. Silver Rock's board of directors dissolved under a cloud of lawsuits and criminal investigations. But by then, few in Boulder even remembered their names. Only the land remembered. In the way the earth sloped gently again toward the creek, in the way new roots stitched the soil back together, stronger than any poured concrete ever could be. As summer gave way to fall, Stallone found himself drawn more and more to the porch, to the view of the reborn creek snaking its way through the fields like a silver thread. He spent evenings there, coffee cooling in his hands, watching the geese return overhead, listening to the slow, steady heartbeat of water against stone. Sometimes neighbors would stop by, offering pies or homemade jams, lingering on the porch steps with easy smiles and stories about the first time they'd seen the floodwaters rise, the first time they'd realized the land didn't care about paperwork and blueprints. It cared about respect. It cared about balance. No one talked much about the lawsuits anymore. The wounds were still raw for some, but healing was slow and certain, like the stubborn stretch of new grass climbing back up the eroded slopes. Stallone rarely spoke during those evenings. He didn't need to. He was content to listen, to nod, to offer a quiet chuckle or a steady look when the stories grew heavy with guilt or regret. He understood better than most that regret was a seed like any other. If planted right, it could grow into wisdom. On a clear October morning, a county official stopped by with a certificate printed on heavy cardstock, embossed with an official gold seal. Boulder Creek Community Restoration Award. Stallone accepted it with a polite smile and tacked it onto the inside wall of his cabin, next to the battered land surveys and the faded black and white photos of the creek from the 1950s. He didn't need recognition. The land was the real reward. The clear rush of water, the cry of the hawks overhead, the slow, stubborn return of the cottonwoods that had once lined the banks like ancient sentinels. Those were the only awards that mattered. Winter came early that year, frost whispering across the ground before the last leaves had fallen. Stallone stood on the trail one morning, breath clouding the crisp air, and watched as the first thin sheen of ice began to form along the creek's edges. He rested a gloved hand on the carved wooden sign, feeling the rough grain under his palm, feeling the steady pulse of the earth through the soles of his boots. The land would sleep now, as it always had, gathering strength for another spring. And he would be here, waiting, watching, protecting, not as a celebrity, not as a hero, but simply as a man who had learned one of the oldest lessons there was. You cannot conquer the land. You can only live with it, honor it, fight for it when others forget. He turned toward home, the cabin crouched low against the hillside, smoke curling from the stone chimney. Behind him, Boulder Creek sang its low, timeless song, water over rock, wind over water, the eternal music of a land that had endured long before him and would endure long after. He smiled to himself, a small, quiet smile, and walked back up the trail, boots crunching softly on the frozen earth, leaving nothing behind but the faint imprint of a man who remembered what others had forgotten. Nature always wins, and this time it had a keeper.